When Megan came back from the corporate party that night, I couldn't help but notice faint marks on her skin. Subtle bruises that looked as if someone had grabbed her a little too hard. The sight of them made my stomach churn with unease. I couldn't keep the question bottled up. "What's this?" I asked, trying to sound calm but unable to hide the concern in my voice. She gave me a small, dismissive smile. "Oh, it's nothing," she said lightly. The party was pretty wild. Lots of dancing, and there were contests too. Her eyes flicked toward mine, just briefly, but I caught a flicker of something in them. Unease? Guilt? You know how sensitive my skin is. "These are just from, people bumping into me," she added, shrugging like it was no big deal. Her explanation seemed reasonable on the surface, but there was something about her tone. Something faintly defensive, like she was holding something back. Megan had been to plenty of these events before. In fact, just the night before, she'd attended an elaborate party at a fancy countryside hotel to celebrate her director's birthday. Working at a high-end financial firm, she was no stranger to over-the-top events. Normally, I never thought twice about them, but this time felt different. Something about it didn't sit right. We'd been married for 8 years and had 5-year-old twin daughters. I wasn't the jealous type, not by a long shot. But those bruises? They gnawed at me, and it wasn't because I thought she was cheating. No, it felt worse than that, like something darker might have happened. What if someone had hurt her? The idea twisted in my gut. I couldn't shake the thought that maybe she was brushing me off to hide something far more traumatic. I needed to know the truth, no matter how hard it was to face. The next morning, I told Megan I had a work meeting in the city. My mind raced as I got in the car, my chest heavy with worry. I headed straight for the hotel where the party had been held. The drive felt like it stretched on forever, my thoughts tumbling into worst-case scenarios, each one worse than the last. When I arrived, I came up with a plan. Pretending to be a potential client looking to book a venue for a corporate event, I approached the front desk. The receptionist greeted me with a professional smile and offered to give me a tour. We walked through the sprawling grounds, past a picturesque meadow, along the edge of a shimmering lake, and finally into the grand halls. The rooms were adorned with plush lounges and gleaming dance floors. But as I took it all in, my attention kept darting to the surveillance cameras mounted discreetly along the walls. Those cameras, I realized, might hold the answers I was so desperate to find. Casually, I asked, "How do events here usually go? I heard you hosted a big one recently." The manager, eager to impress, began rattling off details about the contests, dancing, and music. Nothing he mentioned sounded out of the ordinary. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that the footage from those cameras might tell a different story. But how could I get access to them? Just asking outright wasn't an option. The tour ended, and I thanked the manager, saying I'd need to discuss things with my boss before making any decisions. As I stepped outside, frustration and helplessness washed over me. I had no new leads, no answers. Just as I was about to get into my car, I bumped into someone, almost knocking them over. "Oh, I'm so sorry," I blurted out, stepping back quickly. When I looked up, my heart nearly stopped. Standing there, just as surprised as I was Madison. A face I hadn't seen in over a decade. "Madison," I stammered, barely believing it was her. "Ryan?" Her face lit up with recognition, her voice carrying that mix of surprise and warmth you get when reconnecting with an old friend. "Wow, it's been ages." We chatted for a bit, catching up on the years that had slipped by since we last saw each other. Turned out I had no idea she worked there. When I asked, she gave a small nod. "Yeah, I've been here for a few years now," she said with a shrug. "It's okay, the pay's decent, but honestly, it's not really what I want to be doing. I'm just sticking it out for now while I figure out what's next." There was something in her tone, a hint that her story ran deeper than what she was letting on. But I didn't press her. Instead, I saw an opportunity and took it. "Hey, we should grab a coffee sometime," I suggested. "It's been so long. I'm sure there's a lot to catch up on." She hesitated, her expression unreadable for a moment. But then a smile broke through. "Sure," she said. "Let's do it." That evening, we met at a small, quiet cafe not far from the hotel. It was the kind of place with soft lighting and the hum of subdued conversations in the background. The moment we sat down, it felt like we'd slipped back in time, as if no years had passed since high school. We reminisced about those carefree days, laughed at our teenage antics, and swapped stories about where life had taken us since. Madison's laugh. It was so easy, so genuine, eased a weight I hadn't realized I'd been carrying all day. But eventually, I had to steer the conversation to why I'd reached out in the first place. I took a deep breath, trying to steady the nerves that threatened to shake my voice. Madison, I started. I really need your help with something. Her expression shifted, her brows knitting together in confusion. What's going on? She asked. I laid it all out. The bruises Megan had come home with, the gnawing fear that something terrible had happened, and how I was desperate for answers but couldn't do it alone. My words came out tangled with anxiety, but I had to get it all out. I think something awful might have happened to her. I admitted. I just need to know the truth. Madison's face softened, but I could see the hesitation in her eyes. She stayed quiet for a moment, clearly weighing her response. Ryan, I don't know, she said finally, her voice low. It's not that simple. I don't have access to the cameras. And even if I did, I'd have to be careful. No one can know. I nodded, understanding the risk she was taking. But I'll see what I can do, she added. If I find anything, I'll let you know. Relief flooded through me, and I reached out to gently hold her hand. Thank you, I said earnestly. If there's ever anything you need, anything, you can count on me. We talked a little longer after that, but I could tell her mind was elsewhere, her thoughts spinning in a different direction. I couldn't help but wonder what she wasn't telling me, or if there was something she already knew but wasn't ready to share. When we finally parted ways, I was filled with gratitude for her help, but also a sense of uncertainty about what lay ahead. When I got home that evening, Megan was curled up on the couch, her attention locked on the TV. I forced myself to act as normal as possible, masking the storm of thoughts in my head. How was your day? She asked without looking away from the screen. It was fine, I replied casually, offering a smile that felt practiced. Inside, though, my nerves were tangled in knots. I had to keep things normal, at least for now. Madison had agreed to help, and all I could do was wait. The next few days passed uneventfully. Megan stayed busy with work, and I still had a few days left on my vacation. Life slipped back into its usual rhythm. The twins were off at daycare during the day, and every evening Megan came home like clockwork. For a while, it almost felt like everything was okay again, like maybe I'd let my imagination run away with me. The fear that had gripped me started to fade, little by little. But then Thursday came. Just before lunch, my phone buzzed with a short, urgent message from Madison. Ryan, we need to meet. It's important. Without a second thought, I got ready and headed out the door. Madison suggested we meet at the same cafe as before, and when I arrived, I spotted her right away. She was sitting at a corner table, but something was different this time. Madison's usual calm demeanor was nowhere to be found. She looked rattled, her face pale and her hands unsteady. I pulled out the chair across from her and sat down, leaning in. Hey, Madison, I said, my voice low and concerned. What's going on? She glanced around nervously, her eyes darting to the people nearby as though someone might be listening. Finally, she leaned closer and whispered, Ryan, I got the recordings. Her voice trembled, and with shaky hands, she pulled a USB drive from her bag and slid it across the table toward me. A cold sense of dread gripped me as I reached for it. What happened? Are you okay? I asked, my concern deepening. Her gaze dropped to the table, and for a moment, she seemed to struggle to find the words. I got the recordings, she repeated, almost mechanically. Here, take them. I wrapped my fingers around the drive, my heart pounding. Something was very wrong. Thank you, Madison, I said, trying to sound steady and reassuring. This might help us figure out what happened. She nodded, but her eyes were clouded with fear and anxiety. I tried to access the cameras, she admitted quietly, but the security guard caught me. My stomach sank. What? Are you in trouble? I pressed. Her voice broke as she continued. He's blackmailing me now. If I don't comply, he said he'll ruin my career. Her words came out in a whisper, barely audible. I need this job, Ryan. You understand, don't you? A surge of anger flared within me, but I forced myself to stay calm. What's he asking for? I asked, dreading her answer. Madison hesitated, then dropped her voice even lower. He's demanding that I sleep with him. If I refuse, he'll destroy my career. I can't afford to lose my job. I need the money to take care of my mom. She's sick. Ryan, I don't know what to do. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I felt a mix of fury and helplessness. Madison, I said firmly, you don't have to do this. No one has the right to treat you like that. Tears filled her eyes, spilling down her cheeks. But what choice do I have? She whispered, her voice breaking. If I say no, I'll lose everything. I'm already drowning in debt. I don't have a way out. I reached across the table and squeezed her hand gently. There's another way, I said. You don't have to stay there. I'll help you. I'll get you a job at my company. She blinked at me, surprise flickering in her tear-streaked face. What? But I don't know if I'd fit in. I'm not sure I'd even know what to do. You'll be fine, I reassured her. I'll teach you everything you need to know. You'll have a safe place to work, with no one threatening you. And the pay will be decent, I promise. While you're transitioning, I'll help you out financially. You won't be alone in this. Her shoulders shook as she broke down completely, sobbing into her hands. Thank you, Ryan, she managed between tears. I never thought things would spiral like this. I reached over, placing a comforting hand on her arm. Everything will be okay, I said, trying to sound confident. You're stronger than you realize. We'll get through this together. And if that guard keeps harassing you, I'll handle it. I won't let him get away with this. We talked for a little while longer, but it was clear the weight of everything was still pressing down on her. As we said goodbye, I reassured her one more time. You can count on me, I told her. I'll make sure you're safe. When I got home that evening, I did my best to act normal. Megan was on the couch, her eyes fixed on the TV. How was your day? She asked casually, not looking up. It was fine, I replied, forcing a smile even though my nerves were frayed. I didn't mention Madison or the USB drive. I wasn't ready to face whatever was on it just yet. That could wait until morning. Later that night, I called my boss, Samuel, to see if there were any openings at the company. His upbeat voice was a welcome distraction. Funny you should ask, he said. Megan is planning to relocate with her husband, so her position will need to be filled soon. The timing couldn't have been better. Perfect, I said quickly. I've got the ideal candidate in mind. Samuel sounded surprised but intrigued. Let's talk about it when you're back at work, he said. The conversation left me feeling cautiously optimistic, but that night, sleep was hard to come by. I tossed and turned, my mind tangled with thoughts of Madison, the recordings, and Megan. Meanwhile, Megan and the twins seemed blissfully unaware of the storm brewing beneath the surface. I was doing everything I could to maintain an appearance of normalcy, but inside, my nerves were fraying. On Friday, once Megan had left for work and the twins were safely at daycare, I finally mustered the courage to confront the USB drive. My hands trembled as I plugged it into my laptop, the weight of uncertainty pressing down on me. I had no idea what I was about to see, but the tension only grew as I hit play. The footage started innocently enough, showing the typical party atmosphere. Laughter, music, and plenty of alcohol. Megan appeared on screen, cheerful and carefree. She looked a little tipsy, sure, but nothing alarming. For a while, I felt a glimmer of relief, but as the night wore on, the vibe shifted. The alcohol was flowing freely, and the games turned more suggestive. People's behavior grew bolder, more provocative, and the once light-hearted atmosphere began to feel darker, heavier. Then I saw Megan. My heart stopped. She was acting in ways I'd never seen before, uninhibited, overly playful. and far too welcoming of unwanted attention. Her smile never wavered, but there was something off about it. A cold knot formed in my stomach as I watched her movements. She wasn't herself, or at least not the version of her I thought I knew. The footage felt like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. The camera caught a glimpse of the sauna through the glass door. There she was, leaning against the doorframe, her movements slow and almost deliberate. Behind her stood a man. Too close, too comfortable. I couldn't tear my eyes away. There was no fear on her face, no sign of discomfort or resistance. If anything, she seemed content. Then more men appeared. One opened the sauna door, dropped his towel without hesitation, and joined her inside. Megan laughed, a sound so unfamiliar to me that it sent a chill down my spine. She welcomed them, her actions leaving no doubt about her intentions. The group moved deeper into the room, beyond the camera's view, but the damage was done. The realization hit me like a freight train. This wasn't something forced. It was consensual, deliberate. She had chosen this. I slammed the laptop shut, my hands trembling. A flood of emotions washed over me. Anger, heartbreak, humiliation. How could she do this? Why would she involve herself in something so degrading? My thoughts spun wildly as I grabbed what I could for the girls, picked them up from daycare, and drove them to their grandmother's house. I told my mom that Megan and I needed some time apart to handle an urgent situation. She didn't ask questions, just gave me a reassuring pat on the shoulder. Her silent support a small comfort in the chaos. When Megan came home later, the first words out of her mouth were tinged with suspicion. "Where are the girls?" she asked, her eyes narrowing as she studied me. "I took them to Grandma's for a few days," I said flatly, keeping my voice calm even though my insides were a storm of anger and betrayal. "We need to talk." Her body tensed, and for a moment, her expression flickered with unease. But she quickly masked it, sitting down on the couch with a forced air of composure. "What do you want to talk about?" she asked, though a hint of weariness seeped into her voice. I pulled up a chair and sat across from her. My chest felt like it was constricting with every breath, the tension between us nearly unbearable. I knew I had to start somewhere, to give her a chance to explain, though my voice came out low and sharp, edged with barely contained fury. "The party," I said, watching her intently, studying every twitch and movement. "I want to talk about what happened there, about the bruises you came home with." For a moment, her face tightened, the mask slipping, but she quickly composed herself. "Ryan," she said, her tone steady and practiced. "You know how active the party was? Dancing, contests, it was just a lot." Her excuse felt hollow, and I could feel the anger building inside me. I leaned forward slightly, my voice hardening. "Accidental touches?" I asked pointedly. "Megan, stop it. Stop evading. I know the truth." But she wouldn't budge. Her eyes darted to the side, then back to me, her voice growing more defensive. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, shaking her head. "I told you, it was just a party." Her lies piled up, each one more absurd than the last. I could barely believe what I was hearing. My anger burned just beneath the surface, but I forced myself to stay composed. I wasn't about to let her twist this into something it wasn't. She tried to spin it as a misunderstanding, a mistake she hadn't fully grasped at the time. But I was done with the lies. The rage that had been simmering inside me finally erupted. "You didn't even use protection, did you?" I shouted, my voice trembling with fury. "Or do you just not care? Should I be expecting a child from one of those men now?" The words came out in a flood of anger, each one laced with the pain of betrayal. That was the breaking point. Megan's face flushed, a mix of fear and anger flashing in her eyes. Then she snapped. "You paranoid freak," she screamed. "You're just a boring, suffocating husband. You never let me feel alive." At that party, I finally felt like a queen. Not just your dull, predictable wife. Her words were like a slap across the face. A queen. She had the audacity to justify her betrayal with that. My whole body trembled, disbelief and fury surging through me like a tidal wave. I took a step closer, my voice dropping to a venomous hiss. A queen, I repeated, spitting the word like poison. You destroyed everything we had for that? For a fleeting moment of excitement. Her eyes widened, but instead of remorse, all I saw was defiance. There was no regret, no shame, just a cold, unflinching challenge. And in that crushing moment, I knew. I didn't know her anymore. The woman standing before me was a stranger. The room fell into a tense silence, but then she broke it, her voice trembling with long-buried resentment. You don't understand, she cried. I'm tired of just being a wife and a mother. I wanted to feel desirable, free, just once. Can't you see that? Her words stung as deeply as the betrayal itself. My heart was breaking, but the anger coursing through me drowned out the pain. I clenched my fists, my voice shaking but firm. We're getting a divorce, Megan, I said, my tone leaving no room for argument. I can't live with you anymore. For a moment, she froze, her face twisting into a mask of fear and fury. Then she lashed out. Come on, Ryan. Everyone cheats. You probably have a mistress, too. You're just better at hiding it. Her accusation hung in the air like a toxic cloud. My chest tightened with rage as I glared at her. This isn't a family anymore, I said coldly. You destroyed everything with your betrayal. Her screams echoed in the room, desperate and pleading for me to reconsider. She accused, she begged, she shouted, but I wasn't listening anymore. The argument was over. The damage was done, and I knew it was time to move on. In the days that followed, I sought legal advice and started the divorce process. The twins stayed with their grandparents for the time being. I refused to let them be caught in the turmoil of what our home had become. Megan tried to hold herself together, but it was clear she was spiraling, lost in a haze of depression. As I packed up my belongings, preparing for the separation, I stumbled across something that shook me further. Tucked away in a drawer were recent hospital records. My heart sank as I read the diagnosis: an unpleasant, but not life-threatening, sexually transmitted disease. She had contracted it from one of the men in the sauna. The revelation hit me harder than I expected, reopening wounds I thought I was starting to close. But instead of breaking me, it fueled my resolve. I couldn't let this go unanswered. Quietly, I began an investigation. Using social media, I tracked down the men from that night, piecing together their connections. Through their profiles, I discovered their wives. Keeping my identity anonymous, I sent them photos and subtle hints, urging them to check their husbands for sexually transmitted infections. It wasn't a grand revenge, but it felt like a small measure of justice, an attempt to expose the truth. Meanwhile, the divorce progressed, though the court, as expected, favored Megan. The twins were officially placed with her, but in reality, her depression meant they spent more time with my parents than with her. I made sure to be there for them as much as I could, taking them on weekends and trying to provide the stability they deserved. In the midst of this upheaval, I followed through on my promise to Madison. She was a bright, capable woman, and I helped her secure a job at my company. Watching her regain her confidence and rebuild her life gave me a glimmer of hope, even as I grappled with the fallout of my own. It was a fresh start for Madison, and she thrived in her new role. She was respected, valued, and genuinely happy. In return, she brought a renewed sense of joy and light into my life. As we spent more time together, our connection deepened, naturally evolving into something far beyond a professional relationship. It felt as though we were finally setting things right, correcting the mistakes of our past and steering our lives back onto a better path. After the divorce was finalized, Madison and I grew even closer. It was as if a new chapter was unfolding, one filled with kindness, compassion, and understanding, things I hadn't realized how much I needed. She seemed to know me in a way no one else ever had, and what made it even more special was how she embraced my girls. From the moment she met them, she welcomed them with open arms, and they, in turn, adored her. As the weeks went by, I started having the girls stay with me more often. The atmosphere in our home transformed. It was filled with laughter, warmth, and joy, all the things I had been missing for so long. It felt like the family I had always dreamed of, one that was whole and genuinely happy. Megan had become a part of my past, a chapter that was now firmly closed. My future, with Madison by my side, felt brighter and more hopeful than I ever thought possible. For the first time in a long while, I felt at peace, ready to embrace the life that lay ahead.